Nobody knows their name. They're showing up every day. They're providing for their families, their communities, taking care of even their grandkids and even their parents. And nobody knows their name. They kind of strip off their identity, and they do that for decades, and then they just die in poverty. And so when I think about sustainably fixing poverty, it's just those people and thinking, how can you break the cycle?
Welcome to the Philanthropy Masterminds podcast, brought to you by DonorSearch, the show that takes you inside the lives of thought leaders, innovators, and changemakers in fundraising, philanthropy, and civil society. I'm your host, Jay Frost. In this episode, we speak with Nelly Cheboi, founder of TechLit Africa, one of Forbes 30 Under 30 for social impact and 2022 CNN Hero. She shares her journey from childhood poverty in rural Kenya to raising money to build a school while only a junior in college, bringing computers and training to thousands of children in her home country, and her vision of a world where young girls have enough to eat, a roof over their heads, the resources to go to school, and can grow into women who will be known by their own names. So where do we begin? I have seen a number of interviews that you've done, and you have a lot to say about TechLit Africa, and I want to ask you about that. But I'm really interested in hearing about your own origins, and especially your mom. She seems like she's been a big part of your life. I mean, everybody's mother is.
Yeah.
But you've talked about her a lot in relation to your work. Do you mind sharing a little bit about your mom?
Oh, yeah, gladly. Yeah, so my mom is, her name is Nelly Cheboi, and she's a mom of 4 daughters. And so she made it to 6th grade and then dropped out. She's the oldest in her family. And so she, before even educating us, was educating her siblings. So her 5 siblings. And so most of what she used to do was, so for most of Kenya, like mostly in the rural area, there are no jobs. So mostly you wake up in the morning, you go look for a job if it's construction. And then also like mostly women, what they do, they either go and work in farms, if it's like just daily wage in farms, or sell something by the roadside. It could be vegetables, could be fruits, could be food. And that's what my mom mostly used to do. So whatever is in season, she'll go sell it. And then if she's selling vegetables this week, then mangoes next week, and then maybe buying and selling goats. And so, so for most of my formative years, it was just me and her, because my 2 elder sisters were in school. They were in boarding school, high schools in Kenya, boarding schools. And so since I was in maybe 4th grade up to 8th grade, I was just me and her, and my younger sister was really young. And so I kind of got to see her, just like I was just really curious, a very curious person. I love studying looking around my environment. And what I constantly saw is that she's working really hard. Mm-hmm. And as a child, I had this disconnect, because in school, you're told if you work hard, things are going to work for you. You're going to have a great life. And I'm looking at my mom and I'm like, she's doing everything right. Why is life still really hard for us? And she just used to work really hard. Sometimes she'd get home at midnight because she was stuck buying vegetables somewhere, or she'll be the only woman driving all the way to the border of Ethiopia to buy goats. And then she comes home really late. So I am like, I'm living in poverty, struggling with food, and it's really hard. You're trying to make sense of this. You're trying to understand, why am I struggling with food? Why don't I have clean uniforms? Why don't I have nice uniforms? Why don't I have shoes? And you're trying to understand, but I can't really blame her, because, hey, she's working. And so that disconnect made me start thinking about poverty. And it was more like, wow, like, how does she do it? How does she wake up every morning and just work really hard for us, not even for herself, and still do this for so many years? So it made me really appreciate her as a person. And it made me try to find ways, as opposed to trying to figure out what is going on with her life and why am I living in poverty. It was more like, how do I elevate the pain that she's going through? And as a kid, I could help her, like if she's baking food to sell, like bread or chapati or mandazi, I could help her do that, or I could help her sell the vegetables, or I could help her with herding cows. But it felt like it wasn't really doing it. And so that's why when I learned about this song I used to sing to her, which was like a promise that I learned in school that says, my hands are so tiny, I can't do anything, but when I grow up, I'm going to show you the world. When I learned about that song in school, I just came home and I sang it to her, and I saw how like it kind of like wiped her tears away. It kind of like for a second, it brought this moment of relief. And so that is it. So I kept singing to her all the time. I kept singing to her. And that song is a promise on its own, right? And so as I sang to her, I just kept thinking like, oh, wow, I can do that. Maybe when I grow up, I can do that. So, and I think that gave me so much empathy, thinking about people's life, thinking about, if you see someone is struggling in poverty, you just can't assume that they're lazy, right? And just trying, like, it gave me so much empathy, and it gave me so much this need to really help, this like kind of generosity that I have today as I'm leading TechLit Africa. I think that came a lot from watching her and trying to make sense of my world growing up in rural Kenya in poverty.
And as you described her and wondering how she could do what she did, not just for you and your siblings, but doing it for her own siblings, that's remarkable. How did she find the strength to do that? Because not everybody can. I mean, that's something special. And the crazy
part is that that's such a common narrative. That is such a common narrative for her and women like her. Most of the women, I think, like I think about even right now, when I think about my hometown in Mogotio, there are women who have been there since I was in second grade. That is more than 20 years ago. They have been there and they're still there until today. And I'm thinking, like, what kind of resilience does someone have to show up every day and fight, to provide for their family, to provide for everyone. And yet, like, most of them, just that's all they know. And then they just die in poverty. And I think it really puts a lot of things in perspective. Being an entrepreneur is hard. I mean, we're not going to lie about that. But then when you compare the challenges you have as an entrepreneur versus like the kind of resilience it takes for these women to show up every morning for decades. And sometimes you don't even know their names, because in Kenya, once you become a mom, like you kind of like, no one calls you by your name. You just becomes like, so my mom would be Mama Nelly, for example, right? So these women, we call them Mama Mboga, like the woman of the vegetables. Like they sell vegetables to their Mama Mboga. And so these are women who are like, nobody knows their name. They're showing up every day. They're providing for their families, their communities, taking care of even their grandkids and even their parents. And nobody knows their name. They kind of strip off their identity. And they do that for decades, and then they just die in poverty. And so I think that is the people I think about a lot when I think about sustainably fixing poverty. It's just those people, and thinking, how can you break this cycle?
Can you paint a picture of the place where you grew up for those who don't, who've never been to Kenya and certainly have never been to your hometown?
Yeah. So it's a small village, and so it's common that you don't have electricity or running water, and so you have a latrine outside, as part of the homestead, and then most people are subsistence farming, so they plant crops, maybe maize, which is corn or beans, and then what else? And so as a kid, you wake up in the morning, you have tea, and then you go to school. Sometimes they have food in school, sometimes they don't. You come home over the weekend. Like my childhood, most of the times, like over the weekend, I was herding cows, taking cows to find grass. So you're herding cows. And so I didn't really get to play with my friends. So I was spending most of my free time either herding cows or helping my mom at her business. And so I always really craved just playing with my friends, but I couldn't. And so I was always like, I will have a book with me under an acacia tree, which is a common tree there. I'll just be reading as I'm herding the cows. And that really, I think I was in my head a lot because I was spending most of my time alone. If it's herding cows, if it's helping my mom at her place of business, if it's selling vegetables when she's not around and stuff like that. And so I spent most of my time just thinking about you're just all alone. So you're constantly fantasizing. I'm thinking about, what are ways I could fix poverty? And I'm thinking, okay, maybe I could build a big kitchen so I can feed everyone, or maybe I could build a nice estate so we all can live well, And then for studying, we didn't have electricity. And so we used kerosene lamps, but kerosene is expensive. And so I used to go and study in storefronts where they have fluorescent lights outside. And so I could just sit on the veranda and study.
So you were talking about books and being young and herding cows and reading. So in some places, access to books is an issue. You had access to some books. Where were you getting the books? What were you reading? What's a book that you remember that was really important to you as a little kid?
I think I'll find books. I had two elder sisters, so sometimes they'll bring books from their high school. Mm-hmm. So I'll be like in 6th grade and I'll just read like a high school level book. Sometimes just a science book that has all this complicated chemistry in it. I'll just read it. For most of the time, I was trying to kind of make sense, trying to understand, because I was constantly thinking, and I kept thinking that does every child worry about this? Does every child worry about providing for their sister, or like I just kept, so because I did not travel, I was in a small village, and so that question I kept asking myself over and over again. And so books was kind of like the window to the world. It's like if I find a book, I look through all of it, I read it, I look at the pictures in those books, and then I imagine what like there's this science book I found when I was in 4th grade. I think it was like a 6th grade science book, and it said like all the things that a house has, and it had a vacuum cleaner, I don't know, toaster, microwave. I have no idea what these things are, and I kept thinking, I'll have that in my house one day. So it was almost like just a way of trying to imagine the world outside of Mogodio. And I guess that's why I really loved reading. So it wasn't like very like fancy books. Any book I found, I just took it with me and I just tried to read it.
Right. Well, I know you've talked about in other places that you didn't even know what a computer was. I don't know if you were exaggerating or if you were being very...
No.
I really had no idea.
Oh. Right. I did not know.
And so, I know you were introduced to some of this as you got older. I guess that's true for any kid, but especially a kid who doesn't have access to things like computers. Mm-hmm. But you were very curious. That's clear. Not every kid is the same.
I was really curious. Yeah.
Right. So you were getting these books, you were absorbing this information, and then you were dreaming in your own head. But I'm curious, did you have friends when you did have time to get together with friends, and when you were with sisters, did you talk about any of what was going on in your head? You're kind of imagining how you can change the situation that you and friends and others were in.
I think so I used to talk to my mom a lot because she'll come home. I think for my mom, the question used. I think there was this story I really loved that she used to tell me. So there's this guy who's on a wheelchair, and I kept asking, "Hey, Mom, tell me about, Koske," and then she would tell me all about Koske's life. So Koske was a preacher, and at that point, a very respected person in the society, almost like living a decent life. And then my mom was telling me about how, when he was growing up, they were really poor. Even the wife was really poor, and they were shunned by society. And somehow they've been able to pull up, and now they're respectable and they have income. And I love that story so much. So it used to be like a treat where, so we don't afford kerosene, but then when I have kerosene, I get to study at home instead of going to the veranda to study. And so it's a one room, but then it's a one room apart, like one room, right? But then you have curtains to separate where the tables are and the bed. So my mom is laying in bed trying to sleep, and I'm on where the tables are trying to read on the kerosene lamp. And I'll tell my mom, please tell me about that story about Koske. And then, she will be telling me that story. And then the story was just incredibly sad. And I'm just really crying. I'm crying, but I'm just like tears are just falling on the books. And I think the reason I really love that story was because of just how they made it, right? Even though their life was really sad, they were able to kind of like rise, and now they have income, and now they have a really good life. And so I think most of the time when I had questions, it was mostly I was asking my mom, because I was spending most of my time with her. Like at night, I'm not herding cows, we're staying at home, I'm asking questions. And so sometimes I'll see things in the newspaper, and that's the first person I'll ask. I'll tell mom, hey, is everything in the newspaper true? And then she'll say yes. This time I'd seen someone who was starving, like really, I'd never seen that picture before. Like in northern Kenya, there was drought, and someone was just like very malnutrition. You could see bones. And so I was so saddened by that. I went to her and I was like, hey, so she had no idea what I was asking. I was like, hey, mom, is something in the newspaper true? And then she says, yes, it's true. Why? I was like, nothing. And that picture made me so sad. I was like, if that person is making on the newspaper and they're hungry, why is no one feeding them, right? Why is no one doing anything about it? So I think like I would have all these complicated thoughts, but I'll just like kind of like simplify it. Like my mom telling me the story of Koske, according to her, she's probably just telling me because I love that story. But for me, it was kind of soothing, reminding me that no matter how bad life is, it gets better. Asking about the newspaper, it was really like trying to understand this complex world where someone is starving, is on the front of the newspaper, and no one is doing anything about that. And so I think it was really hard to kind of like, even right now, like even at home, like it's most of my siblings have no idea what I do.
Really?
Yeah. It's just really hard to like all these complex thoughts I have, all these ideas I have. It's just really hard to kind of like portray that or explain that to them. So sometimes I just simplify, or I don't really do it. So I think I was just in my head a lot. And when it comes to like trying to ask those questions, I give people the ambitions I had. I never really did that, but in a way, like you kind of like get a glimpse of it, like through my mom or yeah.
So you're doing what you need to do to help your mother, but she's also doing what she needs to do, not just to feed you, but also so you can go to school. Because another thing that American audiences don't typically know, and you know this from having spent so much time in the United States now, is this idea about needing to pay to go to school.
Yeah.
So and it's everything, right? I mean, it's tuition, but it may be uniforms as well, and then
it's a lot.
Can you help?
I mean, schools are very expensive because you find people are making like $1 a day, maybe, or $2 a day, are being asked to pay like $300 a month, like for tuition. And then there's also shopping, especially high school. High school is the most expensive part because even universities are cheaper than high school, just for context. So, you're paying about $300 a month for tuition, and then you have to pay for bus fare. You have to pay for, any amenities, like any things they may need, like if it's books, if it's calculator, uniform, and all these things. And so you find that most people in school, when they go to high school, they are constantly sent home for tuition. And so you'll find parents who have accumulated wealth, either by buying goats or cows or even land. Once their kids go to high school, it's just gone. Like they just start selling. You find, like, especially when you have like 4 kids back to back, by the time you are on the last kid, you don't have anything to send them to school because you're selling your cows, you're selling your goats, you're selling your land to educate your kids. But they're not jobs to begin with in Kenya. So these kids are educated. Yes, they're educated, they did well, but they're not jobs to begin with. So now they're back, to stay with you, or they're just doing, daily, like these odd jobs, like taxi or farming. And so even though the parents were able to build wealth, it's getting harder for the kids to build wealth. And then the cycle just continues like that.
I can imagine for you, this must have been particularly challenging because it wasn't just the studying, which you wanted to do. It was also this realization that your mother was working that hard so you could do it. And because you have this sense of responsibility. That's what's clear, is and not wanting to just give back, as we say very lazily here, but do something bigger than that. And so there you are going to school, and you probably were very aware that every day you spent in school was at a cost. How did you manage to, I don't know, get all those things?
When I was in high school particularly, so I knew that if I study hard in school, I have a chance. My idea was like, if I do well out of my primary education, I might get a scholarship. And so then my mom doesn't have to worry so much about educating me. I did well, but I did not get a scholarship. So I was constantly sent home for tuition. And I knew that, so I had to catch up, because I knew that every time I go home, I'm missing school. So I'll ask my classmates to kind of like, I'll borrow their notes on their books and then study and bring it home. And then, and study on the bus ride home or at home when I'm helping my mom make money. And so I always snack back in. So I'll go back on Sunday when the accountant is not in, and then lay low until I'm sent home again. They're not like me in that school, no.
Well, I hope they like you now. But before we go back to that,
yeah, I had to get my education, Sam. I wasn't like just gonna stay home, so I just made a plan. I'll just go home and just lay low until Sunday when I knew that the accountant was not in. I just sneak back in, catch up on my studies, and then go back. Like, you gotta do what you gotta do. I wasn't gonna miss school because of tuition, so.
Right. So, okay. So you made it through all this. And then at some point you decided you were going to go and study elsewhere. And I know you got a full scholarship for this, but that doesn't explain how you, sitting wherever you were in that village, going to this school and just trying to make sure it worked out with the accountant every week, how you then developed this idea, well, I think I'll go to school in the United States and I'll get a full ride scholarship. And I mean, so where did these ideas come to you? How did you find the opportunity? How did you pursue the opportunity?
Okay, so I'm actually, it's a bit different. So what happened is that I did well out of high school. Like, I was the first A in Mogotiu, and there were celebrations in town. But for me, I always had this thing where whatever at a given juncture, I have to do all I can. I have to do everything I can, so that it's almost like engineering my own future. I have to do all I can so that if something doesn't go my way, I don't have to look back and say, well, I could have done that. So I really hate regretting. I want to be able to say, wait, well, for example, if I'm applying for a grant, right? Or if I'll say like, okay, I have to apply, I have to answer the best I can, I have to do all I can, so that if I don't get the grant, I want to be able to say that, hey, I did all I could, and I will not regret, right? And so that has always been how I approach my life. So after I graduated and I was the first A in Mogotiu, I done really well. I did not sit back and say, okay, I've done really well, let's see what opportunities I get. It was more like, okay, I've done really well, what now? And so what I used to do, it's like, everyone I meet, I'll be like, oh, my name is Nelly, I just got an A, my name is Nelly. So I was kind of marketer in town, like just telling everyone, until someone heard about it. And they were like, oh, you're Nelly who got an A. I'm like, yeah, that's me. And so then they told me like, oh, there's this organization in Nairobi that take, girls like you and help them to apply to scholarships in the US. And so that person linked me up to this organization in Nairobi. So I went to Nairobi and I applied. But then when I got there, they will only give you 4 schools to apply to, right? They'll try to match your personality to a school. So I was given 4 schools, and they'll take around 200 girls, right? But then only 30 people will get scholarship. So I was looking at a 15% chance of getting a scholarship. And I was just thinking, how can I increase my odds? So I used to go back. I'll go back to them and be like, hey, can I get more school? Can I get more schools? So I ended up applying to 20, which is 5 times what people are allocated to. They just told me like, hey, we don't have any more schools for you. I was like, okay. So I started asking the people around me, like, what schools did you apply to? And then I'll apply to that school as well. And then I ended up applying to 20, and I got rejected in all of them. Again, 15% chance of getting a scholarship, right? I got rejected in maybe rejected partial scholarship, so it doesn't matter. And what happened now is that one of the school had a scholarship. The person they gave the scholarship to had visa issues, they could not go. And so they the office was like, what about Nelly? So all of them were campaigning for me to get the scholarship because because they saw like, oh, she was so resourceful. She kept trying to get more schools, and that's really how I got the scholarship.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so then you decide to actually leave because it's still a decision. Each one of these things you did was a decision on your part. It was really about agency.
Yeah.
So then you took the scholarship and you went over and you studied at Augustana.
Augustana, yeah.
And when you entered, was it to study math initially, or did it matter? Were you just looking for an opportunity to learn somewhere?
It's a liberal arts college, okay. And I wanted. I always wanted to be a pilot, and then when I flew for the first time, I just hated it, and I was like, I'm not going to be a pilot.
Well, wait a minute. When was this? Was that to actually fly to the school, or were you flying?
Yeah, it was my first time to fly. It was a 16-hour flight, like 8-hour flight to Amsterdam, then another 8-hour flight to Detroit, and then another 1-hour flight. And so it was a very long flight. And I realized, like, because I had no experience, I just imagined just flying, I think as a kid, thinking about what I want to be when I grow up, being a pilot seemed really nice because then I could travel, I could see the world, I could, especially given that I always wanted to like look at what life is like out there, right? Mm-hmm. And so, but then when I flew for the first time, I realized that is not what I wanted to do. And I think that was just really sad. That was really sad because I kept thinking, like, if I was a kid in America, I would have known what flying was like. Like maybe I would have flown, or I would have known. But because I grew up in Mogotio, I've had this dream for more than 10 years, but I had no experience. Like I had no idea what being a pilot was like. I was actually looking for a pilot in Mogotio. So I started asking everyone, do you know a pilot? Do you know a pilot? And the closest I got is that there was a guy who knew someone in the army who may know like a pilot in the army. And I kept calling that guy, hey, do you know the guy who may know a pilot? So I kept looking for a pilot all my life. And so I did do my research. So it was almost just, I think when I got here, it was extremely sad. First of all, I realized like, hey, not everyone has to worry about food. Like I realized the abundance here. I realized all the opportunities that kids have here. And then, so I was constantly thinking like, okay, how do I bring this back to my community? And then on top of that, I'm trying to find a new career now because, okay, so I've had this dream for so long. I have no idea what to do. And then I thought about being a doctor. And then I heard about the cadaver lab and I was like, okay, maybe not that. And so then I came across chemistry. I was like, okay, maybe I can do chemistry. I was good in chemistry, but I was still kind of trying to find what I could study.
But this idea about abundancy is something I've heard from people before. Even my in-laws talking about the first time they went from Asia, going into a U.S. grocery store and seeing so much stuff everywhere. But that must have been even a bigger version for you because you're coming from this village, right? You're flying here, you're taking this ridiculously long flight, and then there you are at college, and you see all this stuff, plus all the stuff in the heads of Americans who are used to that abundance. Yeah. What was that like for you to experience that?
I think it was definitely eye-opening. I think it was just, it became a continuous theme that, for example, when I discovered, so I did chemistry for 3 years, and then I discovered computer science and the software engineering field. I did not know much about it. And so I took an introduction to programming and I just fell in love with it. And so I was like, okay, maybe I'll go ahead and do this. And in that class, I really struggled. I really struggled with typing. I don't know how to type. I really struggled even Googling, like all these things. And I kept, as a way to give myself solace, I kept saying, hey, Nelly, you made it all the way to America, from the village to America. The reason you're struggling is simply because you grew up in Mogotio. And that, I was supposed to be giving myself solace, but that actually made me extremely sad. It just made me realize, like, it didn't matter that I made it all the way to America. I'm still struggling with technology. What about people who are in my community who may never leave? And so I think for me, it was almost like this juxtaposition of the opportunities that we're not having growing up in such a village. And in just how far behind we are because of that. And so it was almost just painting the two pictures. So like I resented America, no, or I felt like Mogotio was less than. It was more like, okay, which of these opportunities can I actually implement?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you were already kind of
I'm just thinking like, okay,
right,
yeah.
an equation.
So I can't take the baseball, but maybe I can take the computers or
right. Okay, so you're going through and for some international students, they're going back home occasionally. Were you here and then stayed, or did you fly back and forth, or so?
Okay, I had a lot of things. I mean, immediately, I got here and I got a work study program, minimum wage job. And I mean, I had income. So immediately I had to leave, get my family out of poverty, find ways to relocate them from the shack I grew up in into a more decent living. So I worked for 1 year, saved enough money to fly back home and, move them out, like buy furniture or that, pay the deposit and move them out into. So I flew home the first time a year later. And then I went back again another year also. So I never used to go back in the summer because in the summer I could work more hours, like 40 hours a week as opposed to 20. And that meant I would have more income. And so I tend to go home during winter break or spring break when it was only a week or 2 weeks long.
And you were obviously helping your family to make a change during that.
Yeah, it was more like abroad. I just like moved. So because I grew up in a shack that I slept on the floor all my life, the roof would just like it will leak. And so when it's raining, it will flood. The beddings would get flooded. Right. And so I needed to, I had income and I had responsibility to move them out of that house, get them in a place where there's electricity, decent living, nice furniture, even a TV, And so that's something I had to do. It's no question.
Sure.
But then the other question was like, okay, now that I've moved them out of poverty, I was sending money home every month for rent, for water bills, for electricity. And I realized that was not sustainable, right? And so I was constantly looking for what else can I do to enable them to make their own money. Right. And so I was constantly thinking. So when I went home the second time, I realized, well, I could build a school. And then I saw my sister was teaching at a school, and I was like, wait, I could build a school. This building is very simple. I'm a Kenyan in America. I want to build a school. How hard it would be to fundraise for that? So I just thought it would be easy.
So what happened? Did you try to do a crowdfunding effort or something for a school?
I did, yeah. It was terrible. I only raised $300.
Yeah, well, you're not alone. Crowdfunding efforts are tough stuff. So you raised some money and then you didn't build that school. Is that right?
I did. I did build a school. So
you did?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I built a school when I was a junior in college. And so I was so sure I was going to raise money. It was I was like, I'm just going to do it. So I had a contractor to start building the school. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go back to America. I'm going to do a fundraiser. And then I'm going to, And so they were on the ground working. And then I'm supposed to be sending money. I do a GoFundMe fundraiser. I only raised $300. And so then I had two options, like have them stop, right? Or find other ways to make money. And I was like, okay, let me see what else I can do. So I started picking up extra shifts. I started asking other international students, like, hey, can you give me a loan for $500? Ask around. I'm like, okay, I'll pay you back, And so I was able to, I think most of them gave me the loan because it was a negligible amount for them. And so that way I ended up raising enough money to start the school. And then I just paid them.
How much did you raise for the school?
I just needed like 4,000, which is a lot for a college student, but not a lot of money, right?
And then you built the school. Is this close to the community where you grew up, or what?
Yeah. I built the school. I built the school in 2015 when I was a junior in college. Launched it my senior year, and right now the school is a 4-storied community center. Like it's so big. Yes.
And this is serving what kids from like kindergarten?
It's a full school, like from pre-K, all the way to 6th grade right now.
Yeah. I'm also imagining what this must be like for you, but also for the people who are your neighbors, whether they knew you or not, right? The people in the community. So Nelly leaves, and maybe they know her, or maybe they just know her by reputation. Then she shows up 3 years later, and she's built a school. What kind of conversations were you having with people in the community who saw somebody go to the States, come back and build a school? That must have been pretty amazing.
I think most of them, I think we're definitely a success story. We're definitely like, you know how I lived my life, like asking about, I lived my life asking about, that family was gay. Like, hey, what is, that guy, what his life was like? I think we are that now. We've become the story of hope, of like, hey, like poverty as an inspiration day. Like our story, like that's what people are telling. Everyone is just telling about like, oh, that family, they were nobodies. Like, so I think definitely that part is such an honor, because you just hear like when we come by, like people know us, right? They saw how you're just like a single mother with 4 girls. Yeah, they're like, so people constantly tell that story, and sometimes I get to hear as they're telling the story, or they just gives a lot of people a lot of hope. I think that's what I've seen.
There are many people everywhere, all over the world, different circumstances, different economic position, who are either told by others or tell themselves, yeah, but I can't do that. It sounds like you almost didn't believe that word can't existed.
No, I did not. I just sent you a picture of the school just for context. I don't know if you can see it.
I'll take a look at it. Thank you. And so you just went ahead and did it. And
I think and that school actually became a reference. It became a reference for the things that I took on. I just started having a lot of belief in the things that I can accomplish. I believe that if I put my mind into something, I can will it into existence. And then the school became a launching ground for so many projects. And so one of those projects is TechLit Africa.
Yeah. So help us with the transition from building a school where a lot of people would just say, okay, I'm done. That's a wonderful thing. Now I'm going to go and make money. You didn't do that. So you had to finish your senior year, apparently, right? So you went back and you finished school, and then what?
Yeah. So I finished. So when I discovered computer science my junior year of college, and I fell in love with it. And so I was on track for a chemistry degree. I dropped that, my chemistry major. I only had 1 year of scholarship left. So I got a computer science degree in 1 year. I just crammed all my classes. I had taken some of it for my math requirement. I had taken them through chemistry. So that was easy. Mm-hmm. So I got my degree in 1 year, but I could not get a job as a software engineer because, I'll go into interviews. Most of these interviews are remote. And you're told to solve a function, but I could not type, right? I can solve a function on a piece of paper, but I don't know what touch typing was. And so I kept failing interview after interview. So I got a job as doing data entry. So I got a job doing data entry. And in that, my boss did not have words on the keyboard. Like it was just a keyboard with no words on it. And that was so intimidating. I was like, wait, how are you doing that? Like, how are you looking and all that? That's when I learned about touch typing. Right. And I felt it was very stressful. Like I kept thinking that, okay, my liability, I'm typing really slow. I'm going to get fired any moment. So anytime like my boss would come and I need to show him something, I'll just sweat and shiver. Like it not really helped me there. So I'll just get so it took me like another 6 months of learning like every night touch typing before I could pass an interview as a software engineer. So all this struggle that I'm going through, I'm just constantly being reminded how far behind I was when it comes to technology, simply because I grew up in Mongolia. And so I already had a school, right? The school was running for a year there. And I realized that, hey, how can I start teaching kids in my school and the community? How can I start teaching them touch typing, teaching them technology? And so I started like asking around for old computers. I'd ask my workmates, I'll be like, hey, do you have an old laptop that I could, take to my school and teach the kids? And they'll be like, yeah. And so I collected a few computers. I got about like 10 in the beginning, and I flew home 2 years. So I was in the corporate world for 2 years. I flew home. I brought 10 computers with me in my bag. And I had such a great idea. I was like, okay, I'm going to bring these computers. I'm going to set up a computer lab at the school. And then it's going to be open to the public. And people are just going to be coming there. They're going to be learning. It's just going to be so great. So, and then I also met my co-founder, Tyler. I met him at this job. So at this time, we had been dating for 2 years. So he was also flying to Kenya to meet my family. So we go to Kenya. We have 10 computers with us. He was just kind of helping because he was there. We set up a computer lab. And then when he came to Kenya, I think for him, he was so shocked. Like he did not have internet. Like he was using mobile data, but it kept dropping. And he was looking at, people like there in the community, and most of them don't know what a computer is. They were struggling using a computer. And then for him, he's a self-taught engineer. And so for him, he was like that kind of it gave him such a big realization. He was like, I have grown up with computers. He grew up programming calculator games. And so for him, it kind of it became so clear that he needed to also do this. So I was just going to teach computers, and then he just realized oh wow, I need to do something about this. Anyway, so we set up a computer lab. We were only gone for 2 weeks because we have to go back to work. And I'm thinking okay, this computer is going to be used all the time. We go back to America and no one is using the computer lab. No one is coming to the computer lab, and that just made me so sad. I was like, what is going on? This is such a wonderful resource. Why is no one using it?
Right.
And that's what led us to quit our jobs and go back to Kenya to figure out exactly why is this not being used. And so
that's a big bold leap. So the two of you just decided that's it. We have to go back. We saw the problem.
We went
want to find a solution.
for our first date. So I don't know. We just.
Okay, so then you decide to quit your jobs. You go back to Kenya, and there are 10 computers in there right then at that point.
Yeah, so there were 10
in
computers.
In the school that you built.
Yes, in the school that we built. So that school made everything so easy because we already had kids. It was already being used by the community, and so it was such an easy thing to set up there. And so we go back. And then we also bring another 10 computers with us. Now we have 20 when we go back the second time. This time we were there for 5 months. Mm-hmm. And the goal for these 5 months was to figure out why are these computers not useful. So we were thinking that people will start look at the computer. They will start looking around, start learning programming. And then maybe we can introduce them to jobs, networks in Chicago. And then they'll have jobs, and then boom, poverty fixed. But it was not happening. So we went there, and this time now we were actually leading the classes. So we were working with adults. We want to teach them WordPress, how to build websites. We're teaching them all these things, but no one, they're not coming back. They're coming back today. Tomorrow is a different group coming, we were struggling to even have 3 people show up every day. We kept thinking, we're startup founders, right? We kept thinking we just need growth. We only have 3 people now. We just need to have 4 people next week, and then 5 people next week. And that is 33% growth, whatever the growth rate is. But it was not happening. And it was so frustrating. It was really disheartening. And we went even as far as finding a job. Someone in Chicago gave us $200 to build them a website. And so we divvied up the work and paid the people, who are coming to the computer lab to do this website. So learn how to do WordPress. And then if there's no job, they could use the time to learn. And then they'll just come, and then we'll do most of the work and then pay them. And it really was, it just showed how hard it was for someone to go from never using a computer before to making money online. It was just so hard. But meanwhile, we had kids. Kids were just right there, just trying to see a computer. 60 of them. They were just around at the school all the time.
So it sounds like the adults were having trouble making this transition, but the kids were just naturally curious, just like you were. And
they'll come and they'll just hang out, even though they don't get to see a computer or touch a computer. They just hang out at the school. they were so distracting. And so we were like, okay, let's just give you 3 computers, this other room, and then you explore. And then as we figure out what to do with these adults. So we have a nice polished room with like 17 computers on this side, waiting for the adults to come. Only 3 of them are showing up. While on the other side, we have 3 kids and 3 computers and almost like 60 kids trying to use the computer. So the math was not adding up, Anyway, after a month of doing that, and the kids were just growing in numbers, like 60, 100. Then we realized, okay, let's just like maybe do kids half the time and then do adults half the time. And then now more kids were showing up now. It was that time, it was like, only have 3 hours and then you have like 300 kids. Like, okay, what do you do? So they're pretty much like, it just became really clear that this product was meant for kids. Like, it was kind of sad that, okay, with kids, you can't get the impact immediately. You can't get them making like money online immediately because they're kids. But given just how much they wanted it and the impact you could have, like you can imagine getting to them when they're this young and teaching them these skills. By the time they're adults, this is second nature to them. And that by the end of 5 months, we had seen almost 1,200 kids. And it was very clear that we needed to work with kids. Mm-hmm. Something else which was very clear was at a given day, we had an equal distribution of boys and girls. But in terms of the recurring users who was coming back day after day, they were mostly boys because girls were helping with chores at home. And when I was growing up, if we had something like TechLit, I would not have been able to attend because I was herding cows or at the kiosk selling vegetables. So boys were free, they had more free time, and so they would come to the computer lab, but girls were either helping with their siblings or herding cows or selling vegetables. Mm-hmm. And so to ensure equal access, we needed to go to schools. And that was the end of 2019. We realized, okay, we need to go to school because that's where there's equal distribution. We're going to get to both boys and girls. And then it's an existing infrastructure, right? So you just need to bring the computers there. So it was such a high note in 2019. And then COVID happened. Schools were closed for a whole year. Yeah. And so we just waited.
I'm curious, a lot of people who start organizations, they run into other forms of resistance. So initially, you were starting this almost like a business and you were pitching it to adults and the adults just weren't there yet. But the kids were ready to go, just like you were when you were a kid, clearly. Yeah. But then you also have this other thing. When you try to take something that you know is working, like serving now 1,200 kids, mm-hmm. and you just want to bring that into other schools, it seems so obvious. That's, of course, the right thing to do. But did the schools or the community or the adults or the government, did anybody say, oh, I'm sorry, we can't do that here? Or were they all willing and opening their doors to this?
Okay, so at the end of 2019, we were ready, but we did not go to schools yet. COVID happened, and then the schools were completely shut down. So for a whole year, we could not do anything with TechLit Africa. We just waited. We just kept having board meetings, and those board meetings were so sad.
Why?
Yeah, no, nothing to report. You can't even fundraise. What are you going to fundraise on? It was almost like, okay, so how are we keeping the dream alive? I don't know. It was anyway. So and then the schools now reopened. So when COVID happened, all of Kenya, the kids were not going to school. Right. Kenya lost a year in terms of education. And so in 2021, May is when we started going to schools again. Mm-hmm. And that's when we started going to schools. And that has had its own set of challenges that we're working on. But that is the current product that we're working with. So since 2021, we have been going to schools. And then in those schools is where we teach all these skills, like essentially how to be a digital native, how right. to learn, how to use resources online to network, get a job, the things that will enable them to, once they graduate high school, to actually secure a job remotely.
So once they opened the schools, it sounds like they were also open to you.
Yeah. So the challenge has always been and continues to be that the kids love the product, right? This is the best part of their day, coming to the computer lab. But the stakeholders don't quite understand what it is what we are doing. So maybe the teachers or like the administration don't understand. And then we have another challenge where because our product, our service is like we are in schools every single day. We are hiring teachers. There's a lot of costs related to that. And so we cannot keep fundraising for that, because if we keep fundraising for those schools, it's going to be really hard to grow. Mm-hmm. So instead, we charge the parents. So the parents pay about $1 a month, which is not a lot of money, but it's really hard to charge someone who doesn't understand what you're doing. Right. So our biggest disconnect is that we have these kids who love the product, but then the stakeholders and the parents don't quite understand, and they'll be okay with it as long as they don't have to pay for it. But now they're paying for it and so it's a lot of education on our part, figuring out ways to educate the market, the stakeholders, so that we can continue to be in these schools.
And this was really effectively when the expansion occurred, started 2021, May of 2021. And
May of 2021, we did not know. 21 was just like, we had some money that we had fundraised. And so we just like kind of bankrolled it. We paid the teachers from the fundraising dollars that we had. And it was fine because we needed to be in schools. We needed to have a product that we can actually go to other schools and sell. And so in the beginning, we just onboarded a few schools and used that to figure out the curriculum.
How much had you raised, and did you raise that in the United States or in Kenya or throughout the region?
I don't know, probably had like $7,000. We didn't have a lot of money.
Okay, but it was still enough to do what you needed to do, at least initially.
Yeah, but then that also involves shipping the computers, which is very expensive.
Right.
Like shipping a computer easily 2,000, like only for like 50 computers. So you can imagine you want to get computers, and we don't have, like 7,000 was not a lot of money, given that you have to ship the computers, very costly.
And these are computers that were you were repurposing, right? They were used equipment that you were then, I guess, putting in your own operating systems or something like that. So you were doing this very economically, but making it possible.
We work with companies. They are upgrading their IT, so they have old equipment, and then we'll bring it over to Kenya. And then in Kenya, we had modified Linux, which is an open source operating system. Right. And then we kind of optimize it to run on old machines. So we'll get these computers which are about 4 years old, and then we'll have our operating system will run for as much as even up to 12 years. So we kind of like get 8 years of uptime here, as long as they're not broken. Right. If it's just an old machine that works fine, then we can get a few more years of use. Then, like, for a corporate worker, 4 years is so old. For us, 12 years is just perfect. And so we kind of got a lot of years out of it.
Right. Well, and they were also learning things, even using those, like you talked about, young kids are learning touch typing, not just interacting with the computer, but even very basic skills that they can apply to whatever equipment they get or to have access to in the future. So they're learning things really early now. And
they're learning how to build websites. They're learning Python programming. It's really cool stuff that they get to do. It's just such an honor to see. What I've come to realize, just like how no matter how complicated these things are, is like if you find ways to teach to these kids in a very repetitive and almost like fun way, they learn so much. And then we have one of the benefits that we have seen is that they learn a lot better as a group. You get a class of students and you see them every 2 days, and they just, when they go out there, they're talking about it, they come here and they practice. And so they're able to learn very quickly, as opposed to like teaching one kid at a time. That's what I've come to see as well.
When did you realize that what you were developing was going to really grow fast, and that was going to have the impact it's clearly having now, and get the recognition that it's getting now? Was there a tipping point somewhere?
No way. It does. No, it's just so hard. It's, I don't know. I think like only entrepreneurs understand how hard this thing is, right?
What's the hardest part for you? The part that you least anticipated?
I think for me, actually, it's just how incredibly high the highs are, and then how lows the lows are. The variation, like up, down, all the time, all the time. It's just like, and then it just gives you a lot of doubt. You're just like, does it even matter? Am I actually making a difference? I think it's almost like the equivalent of like you're in a bathtub and it's so dark and you're just sitting there and you don't want to leave the bathtub. And it's like, what is it that is going to get you out of that bathtub? And I don't think it's like, it's never the recognition. It's never all these like CNN heroes. It's never like all these accolades. It's really the vision that you have in the world, that once you succeed, this thing will be happening. It's that vision. And then any kind of indication that vision is about, we're getting there, right? So if
are you seeing that now when you go back and you work with the kids in these schools? Because how many kids now are you touching through this program?
I think about 6,000.
Yeah.
I think it happens. So for me, I really, especially, so like what I love doing is spending time with the kids and teaching them. But then when you're running an organization, you have all these other things you have to do, right? And so for me, when I get to this point where I am just so incredibly sad, it's so hard. I just go and spend time with the kids. I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to take a break. I'm not going to look at my emails. I'm not going to look at my phone. I'm just going to go spend a whole day with these kids and just like teach them this new skill or observe how they're learning. And then I just get, excited again. I get rejuvenated to like tackle all these other challenges that, you end up running into. And the funny thing is that the magnitude, like whatever the issue is, the magnitude of the issue doesn't really match the magnitude of reaction. You may have something that will kill you the next day, will kill the organization, but you're just fine, you're not bothered by it. And then you have something very minute, something very small, something very negligible, and that is what like crashes you and just knocks you down. So it's always a roller coaster. What really affects you and what doesn't.
So what does sustain you? Because you're continuing to grow this thing, and I'm sure you have a longer term vision for what it looks like. So what is that vision and what's sustaining you towards that vision?
I think constantly it's just the contracts of what the challenges I had breaking into technology, the challenges I had even getting my education here in America, and then seeing that these challenges that I had those challenges that I had is not going to happen for these kids because, they are like in 3rd grade or 4th grade and they're learning touch typing and they're learning how to code and they're growing up with technology. Being able to see that I've been able to rewrite my story within like a decade or two. And then seeing that, and then so you compare that, and then since I'm in Kenya a lot, you're constantly reminded of just the challenges and poverty that is going on. And so it kind of like snaps you back to reality. You're like, well, you're worried about someone not replying to your cold email. Like, people are still living in poverty here. We have women who have been showing up to the kiosk selling vegetables for 2 decades. Like, come on, right? So I think a combination of all those things in that, like, we have a chance to sustainably fix poverty, break the cycle. And then it's like you're seeing that that's kind of happening because these kids they're doing so much better. They're becoming really technical, and we just can't wait for them to, be at the right age. And then we can start trying to see if we can connect them to jobs all over the world.
You mentioned recognition before, and I know recognition can be both amazing and fleeting, but it can also be an emotional roller coaster. And so you received this award, the CNN Heroes Award, and that's a lot of visibility. But I don't know how sustained that is, because it's one of the things that's amazing about that is that the old line that I know you've heard about 15 minutes of fame, but the reality is you're working every day for these kids and it's making an impact, or you wouldn't be doing it. It's really a big deal. Mm-hmm. And it's wonderful that CNN recognized this. For people who don't know how that kind of thing happens, but also what impact it has on people like yourself, other founders and organizations like yours. Can you talk a bit about that? I understand it was in fact a college classmate or something who nominated you.
Yeah.
What happened? What is this all about? And what has it meant to you and to the organization?
It's a very simple process, actually. So I had no idea that it existed. And so a college, someone I went to college with nominated us for it. And then, and then I got a call from them, and then we just went through the, vetting process. And then that's all there is to it, really. Like, they read your story, and then they do a little bit more vetting, and then they come to the ground and do the video. And so every year they select about like 15 to 20 heroes. Mm-hmm. And then around fall is when they name the top 10, CNN hero. And those are the people that you vote for. Mm-hmm. And so you have 1 month to ask for votes and rally as many votes. And then the one with the most votes wins. And you said something. It's not that easy. No, it's a lot of anxiety, though.
Right. I was going to say it's an emotional roller coaster, even before you went, even after you went. And you said something in one of these videos about vote for us, which I think is really meaningful. So you didn't say vote for me. You said vote for us. You were talking about voting for the organization. Yeah. So there was a bit of thinking there. So, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it wasn't even the organization. When you're saying vote for us, do you mean just TechLit? Do you mean the people that you're serving?
Okay, so so with that, so when I was on the running for the CNN Hero of the Year, I did not think I had a shot at it. Like, I was like, there is no way that I'm going to win that. And so I just decided not to do anything about it. And so 3 days passed, and I told Tyler, I am so happy I get to take my mom to New York. It's so great. And then Tyler tells me, like, why do you think you can't win this? And then I snapped out of it. I was like, okay, I have to do something. Then I have to find out how I can win. And so something I've learned during my entrepreneurial journey is that just because you feel like you deserve something doesn't mean you'll get it. Just because you feel like you need money, no one is going to give you money, right? And so I had to think about, like, how can I get people to vote? And so what I did is I spent 29 days. I had like 32 days of voting. I kind of lost 3 of them just thinking I'm not going to win. The remaining 29 days, I did a countdown. And every single day I woke up in the morning and I thought about, what am I going to share today that will get people to vote? And so I woke up in the morning and I'll think about my story, the organization story, the reason that we are doing this. And it will take me like even 4 hours to think of something to post. By the time I post, I'm just really exhausted, and then the day is over. And that was my time for those 29 days. And along the way, I think we got a lot of people, because it's a very simple ask. It's only 30 seconds and you're asking people to vote. And as you know, for any organization, you always want to get that activation point, right? For most of them, it's like a donation. Like, they donate once and then you engage them. But for us, we got an opportunity to get a very simple activation point, which is like 30 seconds of their time. They vote, they come back tomorrow, they vote, and they get to follow our story, and and then we're going through this journey together. We have no idea if we're going to win. And so I think I ended up enjoying the process a lot more than I thought I would. and I ended up coming up with really interesting posts. My favorite is, I think it was like day 8 when I said, like, 10 years ago, a reporter had a story about a girl who had done really well in her examination, but I had no chance of higher learning because her family had absolutely nothing. He came to do a story, hoping that someone will hear my story and help me. So when he saw the CNN Hero nomination, he came looking for me. He went to the kiosk by the roadside thinking that he would find me there, but the kiosk was nowhere. Asked about me, and then was shown, my 4-storied community center. Went to the schools and saw 5-year-old coding. And he started calling everyone, telling them about what he saw then and what he's seeing now. And then I end the post saying that reminds me a lot of what Bill Gates said. Most people overestimate what they can do in 1 year, but underestimate what they can do in 10 years. please vote for us and all that. And so that took me a while to write, but the point is that like that was the kind of post I was doing every single day. And we got so many people to get invested. And so when the event happened at the end, everyone who was voting was following the story. It felt like this was their win. And so it's like you've gotten all these people kind of like joining the movement. And that was one of the best things. And then, of course, like I had no idea I was going to win. And then like all this, the dream I've had all my life to show my mom the world, like that just happened as well, being able to have my mom join me on stage, the world getting to meet her. I felt like all this dream I had as a kid kind of just came to fruition that day in such a miraculous way that I could not have anticipated. Yeah.
You talked earlier about how, especially women, they, when they become, adults, and then they're working to bring food to their families, and then they're no longer called by their names.
Yeah.
You made a point of calling your mother by her name on the stage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So why is that important?
I think I wanted people to know her. I wanted people to like, she's just a woman who happens to have 4 daughters, but she has ambition, she has goals. She's a person who just happens to have 4 daughters and is working really hard to provide for them. I think she represented all those women that nobody knows their name, who were working really hard to support our societies.
Now, so you won this award, which is awesome. Again, congratulations. You've also been recognized by Forbes and 30 under 30, right? So lots of things have come as a result of this. You're seeing the impact. I hope you're recognizing the impact you're having. It's certainly the numbers are there. And what has it meant to your organization, some of these things? Have you been able to find more revenue coming in as well as...
Yeah, we've gotten a lot of money, which is great. And then also it meant that we can actually finally get salaries. So we've been doing all this as volunteers this whole time for 4 years, which is really hard. So we're able to start drawing a salary now, which is pretty great. But what has particularly really helped is that we've become almost an household name in Kenya. And so even though the stakeholders, the teachers and the parents may not understand what we're talking about yet, they're willing to listen. So before, when we were just like, your kids could be working remotely, they could be making money, they could be supporting you, they'd be like, they don't really understand what you're talking about. But now they're like, okay, now we can listen, now they can work with us, and we get that. So in terms of educating the market, it has gotten a lot easier. It has gotten so much easier to find partners and work with these schools. Well, before it was near impossible. It was just really hard to convince the schools that, this program goes a long way towards empowering our kids. So that is like the best thing that has come out of this, in that we're able to grow our impact.
Right. It must be kind of changing the adult culture of the country in a way, because now they're open. If they're open to this, who knows what else they'll be open to? Yeah,
right. Yeah. But they understand it.
Right. They don't have to personally experience it to believe someone like you who shows them there's another possibility, to invest differently. Yes. So kind of a final question, which is, what would little Nelly, reading those books at the acacia trees, herding the cattle, what would she think about all this? Is this anything that she could have imagined?
I don't know. I think I am very optimistic. I am very I don't know. I think somehow yes or no, because I was like, my ambition was just so big as a little kid. Like she will not be surprised. Like, yeah, of course, why no more? But on another hand, like she would not have a mental model of what it would look like. Like she would not have she had no reference to what this is, right? And so, it's a combination of no, yes, Like even as I was thinking about like fixing poverty, or like things I could think about was just so limited because I've not traveled. You're only like a product of your environment, right? And so, yeah. But yeah.
And the ambition, is it as great today as it was then? Yes,
definitely. Probably less ambitious now because it's just really hard. But it's still there. Now you know the path and you're like, oh my God, this is so much work. So I guess there's something to be said about naivety.
The Philanthropy Masterminds podcast is underwritten by DonorSearch, the world leader in donor intelligence solutions. Our producer is Jack Frost. Our theme music is Be My Remedy, composed and performed by House of Say. You can subscribe to the Philanthropy Masterminds podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find blogs, webcasts, and CFRE accredited webinars with our featured masterminds at DonorSearch.net, or check the show notes and descriptions.